Thank you for coming again to the second day of the Intervene, Interrupt, Rethinking Artist Social Practice Conference, Festival, whatever this is, Love Fest. It'll be a Love Fest tomorrow in true Santa Cruz style. So I just would like to thank our sponsors again. We've had many sponsors who've helped make this happen. And without those sponsors, it couldn't have happened at all. I mean, of course, without the artists, it couldn't happen either. But it's such a beautiful situation when sponsors give money and the money goes to artists. It's just a really nice day when that happens. Yeah, huh? So that's what we've tried to do here. So our sponsors include the Porter College Arts Research Institute, the Dean's Fund for Excellence, the Mary Porter Cezanne Gallery, the Museum Without Walls / Center for Art and Visual Studies, Shakespeare Santa Cruz, the Vice Chancellor of Research gave us some money, Visual and Performance Studies gave us some money. Actually, the Chancellor's Office gave us money for that beautiful dinner last night. So if anybody was there, you know, thank those guys. We also got an instructional improvement grant to help pay for the documentation of this event, and so we've got our media meisters working hard. And I would also like to thank the Consulate General of Israel Pacific Northwest, National Arts Council of Singapore, the Santa Cruz Public Arts Commission, Women of Color and Collaboration, and Conflict Research Cluster. So we've had a lot of help. Can we just give these people an applause one more time? That'd be great. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to introduce Professor Judith Rodenbeck, who will be moderating our panel, or trying to moderate our panel, something like that. And Judith Rodenbeck is currently at Sarah Lawrence College, where she is the Nobel Professor of Excellence and Incredibleness. So, with that, I will hand the microphone to her.
I feel a little bit like Oprah here. So we're running a little behind, and I will be relatively brief. I'll try not to be as long-winded as I usually am. But today's panel is made up of artists who practice in a space that has been known as art and life work. And we've got a range of practitioners. A range of practitioners who will provoke you in multiple different directions. But before I introduce them, I wanted to just say a couple of things about the practice itself. And before I do that, I wanted to read you something from my cell phone, since we do live in 2008. This was an email I got yesterday from my cousin. Dateline San Francisco. The California Supreme Court today held that the California legislative and initiative measures limiting marriage to opposite-sex couples violate the state constitutional rights of same-sex couples and may not be used to preclude same-sex couples from marrying. This is the press release. Of the Supreme Court. So your performance event is extremely timely in multiple ways. The second piece of news I wanted to reflect on very, very briefly brings us back to the topic of this panel. And that is another item that appeared this week, which was the death of Robert Rauschenberg, an extraordinary artist and maverick. He's probably he's most famous for introducing a kind of project known as the Combine for radicalizing a certain kind of collage. I bring him up here he's for a couple of reasons. One, now that he's dead, it can be said, yes, he was a gay man with impunity. But two, Rauschenberg most famously said when asked where it was that he worked and what it was that his collage practice was doing, that he was working in the gap between art and life. And that that statement became a sort of bold statement for artists working in the 1960s and after about a negotiation between a putatively autonomous practice as an artist, that's a sort of modernist construction, and something that became known, for better or worse, as a more postmodern practice that was socially engaged and embedded in certain thinking about communities, whatever those communities were. So I wanted to give props to Robert Rauschenberg in absentia for giving us that terminology, the gap between art and life. So that gap is a very, very interesting space. And it's a space that has been worked in by the artists we're going to hear from today and worked over as well. Rauschenberg is not the only person to talk about art and life in combination with a kind of conjunction. Alan Capro used to talk about the blurring of art and life in the same moment. So there are ways of thinking about these two arenas as connected, related, not necessarily exactly the same, but as informing one another. Other figures that I think of who serve as sort of groundbreaking figures for the kind of practice we're going to talk about include people like Rachel Rosenthal, a long-time, very intense, and amazing performer who's given it up for a life practice that is also an art practice, or people like Judith Molina and Julian Beck of the Living Theater, who, coming from a more traditional theatrical background rather than an art background, have also dedicated their lives to a kind of aesthetics of everyday living. So there are a couple of ways of thinking about art-life practice, and I just want to throw these out as framing terms for the presentations that we're going to see this morning. And the first, I think, has to do with, again, that sort of gap or blur or space between the possible, the infra-thin space between art and life, and the kind of contractual negotiation that working in this territory represents. All of these projects foreground in different ways contractual aspects of sociality, and I don't mean to be legalistic about it, but rather to use that word contractual to help us think about what it means to really consciously address one's everyday practices and those things that otherwise are purely habitual. That contractual negotiation is something that happens internally. It's also it's something that happens between the self and the other, construed in a very intimate way or construed in a much larger sort of community-based way, or to appropriate part of what we heard last night in that wonderful keynote talk by Helen Newton-Harrison, thinking on a much more global scale, right? The speakers we're going to hear this morning, I'm going to introduce them first in order with very quick introductions, and then I will hand over to them. So today on our panel, this is the order in which they will be presenting. We have four, I guess not artists, but artist grouplets. First. On deck is Guillermo Gómez-Peña, performance artist and writer, the director of La Pocha Nostra. He was born in Mexico City and came to the U.S. in 1978. For many, many years, he's been exploring cross-cultural issues with performance, multilingual poetry, journalism, video, radio, and installation art. His performance, work, and writings have contributed to the debates on cultural diversity, identity, and U.S.-Mexico relations. Now, this is sort of a modest biography because, in fact, I think much of his work has been formative of that sort of discourse and really grounding for it. Next on deck will be Susanne Cockrell and Ted Purves, who work collaboratively on social art projects that investigate the overlay of urban and rural systems upon the lives of specific communities. Their projects ask questions about the nature of people and place as seen through social economy, history, and local ecology. And they provide a really magnificent example of a kind of locally grown thinking and community growing project that enacts in a very local and immediate scale some of the ideas that we heard about last night. Third on deck will be